Live. Hey everybody, Chuck Holton here. How's it going? I'm coming to you from Guam again, out here, out just outside my hotel. It is about 6 o'clock in the morning, and absolutely beautiful, beautiful morning. Once again, uh, I tell you, this is a real hardship post. You can do a whole lot worse than having to serve in Guam. It's a long way from anything, but it is absolutely gorgeous. It's really nice. So we had a great day yesterday, and I'm just going to tell you real quick about that. But before that, I just want to let you know what we're going to be talking about today. There was a new report that came out from the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, her organization. It's an annual report on global threats. It gets put out, and we're going to go through that report because there are some very interesting findings in there that you're going to want to know about. And so I will get to that in just a second. But first, let me tell you what I did yesterday because this was powerful. Yesterday, I got to interview about five World War II veterans who were veterans of the Battle of Iwo Jima 80 years ago as we speak. And these guys are amazing, just amazing American heroes. They're all in their late 90s or 100. Well, the oldest one is 100 years old. Strangely enough, the oldest one is the one that's in the best shape, but they're all pretty with it. I mean, they sat around and talked and told war stories, and we just sat around and listened to them, and it was really, really cool. It's going to blow you away when you see the footage. You're not going to believe it. I mean, the stories these guys told, and I just want to talk about one of them real quick because it was very impactful to me. As a matter of fact, it was probably one of the most emotionally draining interviews I have ever done in my career, and that's because this one of the veterans, a guy named Frank Wright, he agreed to do an interview, and along with the rest of them, and so I took him aside and we sat down, and I asked him to just tell me his story, just start to finish, kind of give me the short version, right? Tell me how you joined the military, how you got to, and he kind of was like, why do you really want to know? I mean, it's like, what do you mean? So anyway, I finally got him talking, and he started out. I was sitting here, he's looking at me, and he'd kind of look off, stare off into space a little bit, and then he'd look at me, and then he'd stare off into space as he was talking, as one does. But then he just kind of quit looking at me, and he just stared off into space, and he just kept talking, but almost in a different tone of voice. You could tell just looking at him that he was there. Like he was he was back there on Iwo Jima, and he started shaking, and he started getting teary-eyed, and he got so emotional, and I sat there and watched him go through like all the 5 stages of grief just right in front of my eyes, and get angry, and then it just like, this can't well, how can we do this? How can we do this to people? And I try to kind of draw him back, and hey Frank, and could we talk about tell me about when you got injured? And he said, I'm getting to that, damn it. And like he was so there. I guess it's the only way I can describe it. He was so there on Iwo Jima, and it was painful to watch because he was experiencing all of this stuff. It was 80 years ago, but it was experiencing it like it was right now. And I couldn't pull him out of it. He just kept going, and he got talking about how he lost his whole squad, and how he got shot in the chest, and how the medic that was working on him trying to save his life, they threw a grenade in the hole, and he picked the grenade up to throw it, and it went off and blew his fingers off, and the medic kept working on him with no fingers, and he was just sobbing at that point. to see an old man experience such trauma like that, and I didn't feel like I could pull him out of it, was one of the most painful things I've had to do in this job. Um, it was just mind blowing. It was terrible. I felt like I was being forced to hold a hot poker to his chest, and and he wouldn't let me take it away. Finally, I had to call somebody over to sort of intervene, and he was supposed to go meet with Pete Hegseth, who was here yesterday, and I didn't want him to miss that. And I think he did. They eventually took him to the hospital last night because he was dehydrated, and they said he was going to be okay. And I just felt so bad. I still feel so bad. I've been praying for him all night. Uh, you know, it's often hard to draw people out of their own trauma, and it's almost always cathartic to do so, though. So if you can get people to talk about the things that they've experienced, it's ultimately it's good for them. But if you're a 100-year-old man, could kill you. And I I really hope Frank's okay this morning. He's but he wanted to tell me about everybody I talked to yesterday was like, that was exactly what he needed right now. That's exactly what he needed. I'm talking to the guy in charge of the tour who's done these tours for more than 20 years. He said, we get that. That's common on the guys that come on these tours, especially if it's their first time back. So, yeah, pray for Frank if you would. He's a great American, no doubt about that. Okay, well, let's get into our reporting today because there's a lot to talk about. First of all, I wanted to just give you a quick update on Israel. Yesterday, there was, I think, 4 rocket launches out of Gaza toward Israel. A couple of them were long-range rockets fired by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, PIJ, that made it over Jerusalem before they were shot down. All of them were shot down. And then immediately the IDF started dropping bombs on the areas where those things were fired from, northern Gaza and southern Gaza. And the Palestinian Health Authority, for whatever that's worth, says that like 20 people were killed. And it just is very striking to see that every time Hamas tries to strike at Israel, they end up killing their own people. That's not Israel's fault. That's Hamas's fault. That's PIJ's fault. There were no Israelis injured or killed in yesterday's attacks, but there were, by some accounts, a couple dozen Palestinians that were killed as a result of yesterday's attacks on Israel. And it's just sad to see, it's just painful to watch how they just keep doing that. And so these protests in Gaza are continuing, but they are, the more you watch these, the more you start to go, I think there's more to these protests than meets the eye. This is not just Palestinians that are fed up with Hamas. Uh, Perhaps there are some in there that are, but first of all, Hamas controls everything in Gaza still. And so you're not going to, they're not going to protest without Hamas's permission to do so, or at least tacit permission. They are not giving up the whereabouts of any hostages. So they might be mad at Hamas, but they're not mad enough to actually turn in the hostages and actually assist the Israelis in ending the war. Some of them say they want to leave, and maybe that's Hamas allowing or even encouraging them to say that they want to leave so that that can, be another, I don't know, bargaining chip for Hamas. Meanwhile, Hamas is still firing rockets out of Gaza. Yesterday, the IDF uncovered a 28 rocket launcher built into the ground in Rafah that was primed and ready to fire missiles at Israel. These things are buried in the sand, so they just bury these tubes, the launch tubes, down in the ground, and they're a good like 10, 12 feet. They got to dig down to place those things in there, and then they just put a piece of plywood over them and cover them over with dirt and grass and stuff, and virtually impossible to find unless you're using some kind of ground penetrating radar, which would be very difficult over that wide of an area in Gaza. So that's why they're still able to, I mean, Hamas knows where they are, but the IDF doesn't. So this is in an area the IDF has been through already multiple times, but Hamas, they didn't find those ones. So Hamas goes back, uncovers them, and fires them off. Fortunately, Israel was able to destroy these particular ones before they got fired off. Down in Yemen, the Houthis fired 2 ballistic missiles at Israel yesterday, and those were intercepted before they even crossed into Israeli airspace. As usual, the Houthis doing a bang-up job at being terrible. And the United States struck like 20 different sites yesterday with high explosives. And in so doing, there's claims out of Yemen that the United States airstrikes killed dozens of Yemenis. Again, it's really sad to see the Yemenis willingly sacrificing hundreds, if not thousands, of their own people just for the opportunity to pretend to hurt Israel, because they're not hurting Israel. They're stopping shipping. I guess you could say they're hurting some of their exports out of the port down there in Eilat, but other than that, they're not really hurting Israel. They have only killed 1 Israeli in the entire war, and well, that's 1 too many. But they have resulted in the deaths of likely thousands and the suffering of even more, millions in Yemen. And this just goes to show that when your whole worldview is about who you hate and not about who you love, you can't have nice things. Things are not going to go well for you in this world. Hey, thank you very much, Greg. That's a very generous gift. $199.99. We'll put that to good use. I just heard from some of our girls um, in Colombia that we're supporting, and the church down there is out of building materials, and they're trying to expand and build a bigger sanctuary. So we've been sending money down to them, and they just called and said we're out of money. So I'm going to send them some more money. I'll send them that $200 that you just sent. Thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. And PC says, I don't trust the recent protests in Gaza to be real. Yeah, exactly. I don't either. And PC also says, cool t-shirt, Chuck, from the woke UK. Yeah, I wonder what would happen if you wore this t-shirt around in the UK. Would that be illegal? Would they put you in jail for, I mean, if they'll put you in jail over a Facebook post, maybe they would. Jonathan Mendez, thank you very much for that gift. We appreciate everyone's generosity here on the Hot Zone. So thank you very much. Are you guys? It looks like I might have had some issues. The bit rate is a little bit low out here, but look at the view. I mean, holy cow, the view's amazing. I take this camera off here and show you. Hey, how you doing? War is hell, but somebody's got to serve in Guam. Okay, so let's move on. Um, the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, uh, went before a Senate subcommittee and in a hearing yesterday talked about worldwide threats. And it's interesting to hear some of the things that she said, especially considering that up until very recently, like 15 minutes ago, she was supporting Russia and making excuses for Russia and repeating Russian propaganda talking points. However, now she's changed her tune a little bit, and so I want to read a couple of the things that she said that are important for us to touch on in this global threat update. She said at one point, since 2022, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea have grown closer. Removing the accelerant of war in Ukraine is unlikely to revert these bilateral relationships to a pre-war 2021 baseline, leaving room for new strategic priorities. I wonder who wrote this, actually, because this is such corporate gobbledygook government speak. So let's translate that into English. What she's saying is that China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea are working together more. And even if the war ends in Ukraine, they're still going to keep working together more because they've found some synergies that they're going to capitalize on to try to hurt the West. Uh, so at one point, Senator John Cornyn from Texas asked about this document that I'm mentioning that they just put out. Uh, I presume this is through open sources, but this document compiled 59 incidents, including cyber attacks, spreading propaganda, plotting killings, or committing acts of vandalism, arson, sabotage, or espionage. Is that consistent with your understanding and impression of what Russia's currently engaged in Europe? This is something that you've heard me talk about a lot, that Russia is engaged in asymmetric war against the West, and they are doing it through things like uh, everything he just mentioned here, sabotage and arson and even targeted killings in Europe. All of those things constitute acts of war by Russia on European countries. And I would venture to say that those things are happening in the United States. The Russians just are very, very good at making it look like an accident. I am firmly convinced that some of, if not all, of the recent wildfires across the United States have been started by Russian assets or agents in the U.S. Because these are fires that are happening in places that don't normally get fires. And all of them but one are still under investigation. And the one that isn't was proven to be arson. So the fact that Russia is doing this is no surprise. Like I said, I've been talking about it for a while. But what surprised me was Tulsi Gabbard's admission. She said, Senator, I haven't seen that specific article, but I can confirm that we assess Russia's attempts to conduct such sabotage activities in Europe. Our assessment is that she confirmed it. And she's been incredibly friendly to Russia. And so I was surprised to see that. But let's start with what she said was the most extreme threat to the United States right now in terms of threat to killing Americans, and that is the fentanyl problem, which continues to come in through Mexico. She said that that is the most extreme threat. Uh, and one of the senators said the president has stated that the fentanyl coming through Canada is massive. Now, you hear what I said? Canada, not Mexico. And that it was an unusual and extraordinary threat. And that was the language that was used to justify putting tariffs on Canada. I'm just trying to reconcile those two issues. Is it an unusual and extraordinary threat, or is it a minor threat that doesn't even merit mention in the annual threat assessment? Because it wasn't, the fentanyl coming across the border from Canada wasn't even mentioned in this this article or this document that was just put out. It's a big document too. It's very long. And one of the other senators says it's less than 1% of the fentanyl that we are able to interdict. So yes, there is fentanyl coming across the border from Canada, but it's a statistically insignificant number. And the bigger problem is from Mexico. So what they were trying to do was bash on President Trump for putting tariffs on Canada for not doing more to stop it. But if you understand the real threat on the northern border, and the real threat is that it is so huge. It's 4,000 miles long, and we have the equivalent of one Border Patrol agent for every 30 miles of border. And that's if all of them were working on the border 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which they're not. So, with that in mind, there's probably more like one agent for every 150 to 200 miles of border in Canada. And much of that is absolute wilderness. I've been up there backpacking and kayaking along the Canadian border, and it is total wilderness. And so, the real issue is that we're probably not catching more than 15%, if that, of the stuff that is coming across from the northern border. And there are likely major trafficking routes for not just fentanyl, but other illicit drugs and contraband and people coming across the northern border into the United States. The real thing about that is the government just doesn't know. We really just don't know. We don't have the kind of surveillance up there that we would need to actually figure it out. And that's a problem. So, folks, we got over 200 to 2,000 people watching, and I would recommend or just ask you to do me a favor, go and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It makes a huge difference for our channel. We've had something like 500 people a day subscribing to the channel because of these updates that I'm doing. And I probably wouldn't have half that many if I didn't at least mention it and remind you, because I don't remember when I'm watching a video from somebody else to hit the like button unless they remind me. So please do that. Yeah, just it doesn't cost you anything. We're not going to spam you, but it does tell the YouTube algorithm that more people need to see this content, and it's working. So please go hit that like button right now. Also, the videos that I'm putting up over on chuckholton.com I'm putting extra videos up over there that I can't put up on YouTube, or I'm not putting up on YouTube. Yesterday, one of the veterans that I interviewed was 100 years old, and he's been married for 78 years. And so I talked to him about the secret of a long and happy marriage. And we had a great little conversation. I put that up. That was for supporters only yesterday over at chuckholton.com. So you can get those videos, get access to all of that by becoming a supporter over there. And the money we raise over there helps us to support our different people that we help all around the world, wherever I happen to be. Especially the ones that we have ongoing relationships with, like in Colombia and Panama and elsewhere. What would the repercussions be if Turkey could be removed from NATO? Well, we would likely want to remove our nukes from Incirlik Air Base first. That would be pretty difficult to do. We're kind of in a tough spot with Turkey there because they kind of have us by the short hairs, so to speak. If we decided to take those out of there, we probably would have to send in, a brigade of Marines or something, and it would be ugly. Now, Erdogan is facing a lot of pressure from his own people. There's a lot of protests happening now because of some of the heavy-handed, his modus operandi is just to arrest you and then figure out a reason why later. So a lot of people are, upset that he just arrests everybody. They have more journalists in jail in Turkey than any other country on planet Earth. It's a very, very dangerous place to be a journalist. But he arrested the mayor of Istanbul, and he, is causing all sorts of protests across Turkey. And some people are saying, "Oh, this is going to lead to Erdogan being deposed or thrown out of office. I think that is, there's a non-zero chance of that, but it's very unlikely, just because he has pretty good hold over power still, in terms of the military and the police forces, and those guys are still working for Erdogan and getting paid handsomely to do so. And so, with that in mind, they're just going to crack down and arrest or kill or torture the people who are protesting, and that'll be that. Okay, so let's move on to talk about this report a little bit more. The key themes in the report is that the United States is facing a really complex and evolving threat environment from both non-state actors, that is TCOs, transnational criminal organizations, terrorists, uh, things like that, and state actors, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. All of those adversaries are learning to work together more and more. At the same time, the United States is sort of pushing back from working together with any of our allies. And there's a very interesting video that I just watched from Peter Zeihan that talks about this, where he's saying that we actually are running the threat that a lot of other countries around the world, like South Korea and Germany and countries like that, are going to decide to get nuclear weapons because they no longer trust the United States as a reliable partner to protect them in the case of, if South Korea gets attacked by North Korea. And they already, right now, the way it works in South Korea is that the 350,000 South Korean soldiers that are in their army are actually under the command of the United States military. We've got, I think, 22,000 troops in South Korea, and those guys are just there as placeholders. They're there as a deterrent to North Korea, because North Korea decides to move on South Korea, they're going to have to overrun the United States troops there to do that, and that's going to bring the U.S. into war, and North Korea can't win a war against the U.S. So that's been the whole reason for them being there. But as President Trump has sort of, been rightfully so getting after some of our allies for relying too much on the United States and the generosity of the U.S. to come to their aid if something goes wrong. And of course, he's much more transactional in nature, so he wants to get some kind of quid pro quo. If we're going to help them, then they ought to be doing something to help us, and that is upsetting the status quo. Because of that, these countries like South Korea, it would take them far too long to raise more troops to get to the point where they could be at military combat power parity with North Korea, because North Korea just drafts everybody, right? And so rather than even try to build up their armed forces, they may very likely just go nuclear and go get a nuclear weapon. So we're looking at the potential for vast nuclear proliferation around the world as the United States sort of pulls back from its role as a global protector. Now, also, as these different organizations that are against us, the non-state and state actors, are learning to work more closely together with cyber attacks, with cryptocurrencies, and there's some of the logistics networks that, for example, Mexican cartels have, that they can use to cooperate with China to move fentanyl into the United States. Those sorts of things make for a much more complex threat environment for the United States that we're going to have to deal with. And especially in the cyber realm, as I mentioned on a live, I don't know, a week or two ago, where we talked about the specific cyber attacks and cyber threats. If you've been like me, just pulling your hair out lately, because every website you go to, you've got to sign in 5 different ways with a gigantic password that nobody can, it's got Gaelic runes and a haiku in it in order to be completely unrememberable. but don't write it down. And you got to do the two-factor authentication, and they got to send you a text message, and then you got to do a little puzzle, and I mean all this crazy stuff just to check your bank account or something. And I feel like something that should take 30 seconds for me to just check the balance on my bank account ends up being 5 minutes because all the stupid things that I have to do to just get into my bank account. The reason for that is this cooperation that I'm talking about. The reason for that is because there are hacking groups that are non-state actors that are working together with state actors to get access to things. And that's part of the reason why in 2024, the amount of money lost to cyber criminals and cyber fraud and things like that was $9.5 trillion. I've mentioned that multiple times, but that is a mind-blowing figure, the amount of money. And that's probably why they block my credit card every time I move more than 50 yards in any direction. Of course, traveling a lot, I'm always having trouble with my credit card. I've got it pretty locked down now, but so these threats all working together are what is making. It's not that. I mean, yes, the threat of a terror attack in the United States or some sort of asymmetric war, like being fires being started in the U.S. and things like that. Yes, that's a threat that you have to be concerned about. But I think the bigger threat, the place where you're guaranteed to be hurt by these threats, is in just the realm of your everyday life because of those kinds of things, like uh, the hassles you have to go through to get a credit card. Or I'm trying to get a business account right now, and for one of my businesses, and it's just been a nightmare trying to get. I mean, how hard is it to just open a bank account? It shouldn't be that difficult. I mean, I remember a time in the United States where, I could probably open a bank account in 10 minutes for my dog or something. I mean, it would have been, it would have been so simple. But now it's just gotten harder and harder and harder to do that. And that creates friction on the economy. It creates friction on businesses. And so those are losses that we all have to face, whether or not we are the victim of some kind of terror attack or something like that. But those threats are increasing as well. So terror groups like ISIS and Al Qaeda are continuing to come after the United States. Strangely enough, the most dangerous faction of the Islamic State is now ISIS-K. K stands for Khorasan, which is the ISIS faction in Afghanistan. So the United States pulling out of Afghanistan in August of 2020 turned out to be a bigger boondoggle than we all knew it to be, just because what it allowed was for the Taliban to create an environment in which not just suffering and hardship and hatred and risks to the local populace could flourish, but where terror groups that are threatening the entire globe could flourish as well. Not to mention the fact that about 90% of the world's illegal heroin comes out of Afghanistan. And that is a direct result of U.S. influence in the region, as a matter of fact, because we actually built the canals to irrigate crops in southern Afghanistan that are now being used to irrigate the fields of poppies. Those were built by USAID in the 1940s. So just one more advertisement for taking a very hard look at USAID and thinking maybe a little bit harder about what we're doing and who we're funding and what the second and third order effects of those grants and loans and stuff are going to be around the world. Okay, so I haven't been looking at the comments there for a few minutes, so I wanted to check. Question: we're taking some of our World War II naval vessels out of retirement and putting them back into service, the ones with 16-inch artillery guns. Could they be useful against Yemen? Well, they'd be cheaper against Yemen. One of the problems we have in trying to, uh, kinetically degrade the Houthis in Yemen is that, as I have always said, Yemen is a giant dirt parking lot. So what are you going to do to Yemen? How much pain can you actually inflict on Yemen? And I was reminded of that yesterday when I was interviewing these survivors from the Battle of Iwo Jima. Iwo Jima is a tiny, tiny island. It's 2 miles wide and 4 miles long, and it they shelled that island with and dropped bombs from the sky, from the sea, everything for 66 days. There was pretty much not 1 centimeter of land on Iwo Jima that did not get blown up in the 66 days prior to our troops landing on the shore. But when we landed, there were still 21,000 Japanese ready to fight. And that's because they had tunnels underneath, all underground, and 11 miles of tunnels. And apparently they've uncovered plans. They saw plans where they had planned to increase that to more than 17 miles of tunnels underground on an island that small. And so they just lived underground for 60 days, which was incredibly miserable, without a doubt, because it's a volcanic island, and so you get underground and you're getting cooked. Those guys basically walked around naked for 2 months under there, and there's not any source of fresh water on the island, so they were limited to whatever they could gather from rain, and they were just suffering terribly in those caves. But they with all that bombing, they really didn't do much except just create craters all over the island. And so I would take that as a lesson for the United States in our attempts to win the war against the Houthis by just dropping bombs on them. Right now, when we drop bombs, they're all precision munitions. And so those precision guided missiles and rockets are millions of dollars each, or at least hundreds of thousands, depending on what we're shooting at them. Mostly in the millions. And what are we blowing up with that? Camels. That we're not getting a lot of bang for our buck when it comes to actually making a difference in this war, and that's as seen by the Houthis continuing to fire multiple long-range missiles at Israel every day since we've started our campaign. So the United States has hit the Houthis harder than they've been hit ever before, but it's not making much of a dent. And simply bombing them is not going to be enough. Now, are we going to get to the point where we have to send ground troops in? I keep saying it's not likely. We do have troops on the ground in Yemen. They're special forces A teams that are, in the parts that are not controlled by the Houthis right now. And those special forces teams are, helping to train and equip the Yemeni army. This, from what I understand, there's very little information out there about that for obvious reasons, but that is something that's been talked about quite a bit. So we're not going to send a lot of troops in there, but we could maybe assist the Yemenis in retaking their country from the Houthis. And that might be, a smart thing for us to plan on doing. In the meantime, all we're doing right now is just moving a lot more uh, ordnance, a lot more military hardware into the region, more B-2 bombers, more B-52 bombers. We've got enough there to just absolutely Gaza all of Yemen if we wanted to. But as I've always said, doing that, turning Yemen into Gaza would be an improvement for Yemen. So there's that. Okay, we've got 2,400 people online. Please, again, just second reminder, just go hit that like button, please. Sandra says, have you seen the latest that Iran can have nuclear warheads ready in a week now? Yeah, and actually there are conflicting reports in that Senate subcommittee hearing yesterday with Tulsi Gabbard about that. Some of them are saying, there's some reports saying, yeah, they could come up with a nuclear warhead in a week, and that'd be bad, especially if they make it one of those, they call it a gun type nuclear warhead. I'm going to turn around so the light's not, the sun's coming up behind me and it's backlighting me. So I'm going to turn around, give you a little different view here. And I will stare into the sun now, apparently. So, I mean, they've been talking about this for 30 years, that Iran is close to being able to build a nuke. And I don't think we're wrong. I just think, number one, it's more complex than it looks. And there have been a lot of behind the scenes shenanigans that have gone on from the Mossad and the United States to make it more difficult for Iran to, make a nuke. The Stuxnet virus set them back probably 10 years in that. So that's, one side. And then the other side is saying that because we've been talking about this for 10 years, that they're probably not as close as everybody says they are. I'm not sure. I think the right answer to that is we don't want to take any chances. And, so maybe we should just not take chances in that, okay? The U.S. outsourced a huge amount of total cyber justice jurisdiction to a foreign entity. Okay. Do you arrive Guam at the international airport? If so, do you enjoy the vertical dive landing? I'm not sure what you mean by that, Michael. We had a nice landing at the airport here. There was no vertical landing in Guam. So maybe at one point there was, but not now. It was fine. I don't recall anything. I had a worse landing in New York the other day. About threw me out of my seat. Chuck, there's plenty of that in New York's fentanyl living on St. Lawrence. Local gossip there is plenty. I lived in Whatcom County, Washington State. Literally saw a 5-gallon bucket of fentanyl. That'd be enough to kill everybody in the United States. Today's a great day for the rapture of believers. Okay, like everyone, help out the best journalists out there. Let's go. What do you think about the pyramids story, about there being a city underneath the pyramids? I saw it. I've been to the pyramids. Wouldn't surprise me. There's all kinds of tombs and stuff all around the pyramids, and it's obviously when they built the pyramids, they were not surrounded by desert like they are now outside the city. There was actual water that came up to the pyramids. That's how they were able to float those large stones in to get very close to the pyramids as they were building them. But I'm no expert on that. So I guess we'll, that's all I got to say about that. Okay, any other questions? Bring them up quick. We're coming up on 45 minutes. Just trying to watch the time. Folks, I'm going to be putting up some more excerpts from my interviews with these World War II Iwo Jima veterans yesterday at chuckholton.com. And they're going to be for supporters only at this time. And eventually we'll open them up to everybody, and put them on YouTube and everything. But so you're going to want to be a supporter over at chuckholton.com to be able to get those right away. And I recommend that you go check that out. How do you make great tunnels with sand? The way they make tunnels is they dig a big hole, they build a framework out of stone. Nowadays they do it with concrete, and they build the tunnel and then they cover it back up with sand. That's how they do that. And in Gaza, that's how they've built tunnels. I've seen it all across Syria and Iraq when I've been there. They go out in the desert with a big backhoe and they just dig a line, dig a big trench, and then they take these concrete formed, it looks like looks just like a upside down U or an N, something like that, made out of concrete. And they just drop them down in the hole, and they put those side by side and make a tunnel, and then they cover it back up with sand. So that's how they make those things. Now, how about cooking up a special biologic weapon for Yemen? That would be pretty evil. I'm not sure I would advocate for that. Chuck Beth wants to know if Iran will attack Israel this weekend. I haven't heard anything specific about Iran attacking Israel this weekend. I think that Iran right now is trying to lay low. They've been, the Trump administration has sent them a couple of overtures trying to get them to come to the negotiating table and negotiate, some sort of end to all of this. And Iran's excuse is like, we don't have any proxy forces. What proxy forces? We don't know what you're talking about. And so they have been apparently sending messages to some of their proxies saying, hey, maybe tone it down just a little bit, because they are watching the buildup of military forces in the region by the United States and other countries too. The UK has got some ships there and others. And they are thinking those B-52s and B-2 bombers and stuff are aimed right at us. And as I have said, I believe that it is very likely that we will see attacks on Iran by the United States in the next 60 days. It takes a little while to put an operation like that together, but we are obviously in the opening stages of doing that. And so I think it's likely that that could happen. What happened to the two toddlers of the propaganda video when October 7th happened? I don't know which two toddlers you're talking about, Vincent. Sorry. Will Iran hit Israel? Okay, we already asked that. We need 1,200 more likes. Yeah, please hit the like button. Let's see. Yeah, okay, you guys asked about the Israel. I got it. I think if Iran were to strike at Israel, the United States would definitely start bombing Iran immediately. Okay, so we just got reported repeated comments here. So I've answered that question. What are the chances? Okay, so everybody's asking the same question. All right. What's your favorite flavor of chewy Guam? Really, Edward? You're gonna come at me with dad jokes? You don't understand. You're talking to the master of dad jokes. You don't want to come at me with dad jokes, man. Can I recommend good sturdy backpacks? I certainly can. As a matter of fact, I've actually been in talks with people to make my own line of good sturdy backpacks. But depending on what you're trying to do, if you're traveling wise, just international travel, Osprey is a very good brand. I carry Osprey, several different Osprey backpacks. Whoo, that sun's getting bright. And if you are talking more about like actual backpacking backpacks, then Gregory is a good name that I like, and Golite, Golite. Those are the backpacks that I use when I'm actually going out into the mountains. Patrick Lancaster is seeing some action. Yeah, I've noticed that. Patrick Lancaster gets the kind of access that he does to Russian forces because he gladly reports all of the propaganda that they put out. Question, do you think we will see a war in U.S. soil from internal threats already here? Well, I don't know about a war. I mean, I think there already is a war against the United States on U.S. soil by Russia and Iran. I mean, they, without a doubt, are engaging in asymmetric warfare, unconventional warfare against the United States. And they have learned, because we've taught them, that it's much more effective to engage in war in a non-conventional way. That the days of tanks and artillery are pretty much over, especially with drones now being such a big item. And because of that, the kinds of wars that you're going to see going forward are going to be more asymmetrical. They're going to be more sort of covert wars, uh, weaponizing things like migrants and fentanyl and any and natural disasters, fires and other things like that against the United States. And so if you get my most recent book, which is called Death of Civilization, I talk at length about that in the book. And you can get that book as a free download if you're a supporter at chuckholton.com. But you, let's see, uh, you can buy it on Amazon or whatever if you want as well. But I talk a lot about that in the book, about how these threats are evolving in the United States. It might not be long before we start to see things like improvised explosive devices in the U.S. And there are a lot of experts that I've talked to who are calling for this, saying that that's definitely a thing that's in America's future. Uh, Weaponized drones, all sorts of things like that. How long do you have to stay in Guam, and do you get to go to Iwo Jima? Iwo Jima trip is day after tomorrow. I don't think I'm going to be able to get on the plane because they canceled half of the seats. They had 2 aircraft laid on, and because of the, let's just call them budget cuts by the Trump administration, they canceled both of the planes, and then somebody called Pete Hegseth and complained, and he laid it on, he turned back on one of the 2 planes. And so the seats are at a premium. I don't really need to go back to Iwo because I've been there before. I've already got all the footage I need from there. So if somebody cancels and there's a seat on the plane, I'll definitely go. But right now, as it stands, I'm not planning on going. So, all right, I'm going to have to get off here because I'm going to get fried by this sun coming out. Have you seen the story of the CIA and the discovery of the Ark of the Covenant? No, I haven't. Can we pray before you go? Absolutely. If we were nuclear on Iran's nuclear sites, would you put us at risk with Russia go nuclear in Ukraine, China, and Japan? If we use a nuclear bomb, it works the same way for us. Once that cat is out of the bag, then it becomes much more likely that somebody else is going to use a nuclear weapon. It's been more than 70 years since we employed the first 2 nuclear weapons, and the only 2 nuclear weapons that have ever been used in combat. Since then, nuclear weapons have gotten much more powerful to the point where we could destroy the Earth. And so everybody understands that nuclear weapons are a deterrent, and the first time that they get used, then that opens a Pandora's box that you can't close again. So I don't think the United States is going to use nuclear. I don't think Russia is going to go nuclear, even in a small way, because there have been lots of counter threats that if Russia uses any kind of nuclear weapon, that other countries will use nuclear against Russia. So it's mutually assured destruction. Could the protests in Gaza be staged if they're not serious? Yes, they could be. That could very well be an issue. Um, All right, let's see. I thought I saw one more question, but it just disappeared on me. What do you think about South Africa and the U.S. giving refuge to help some of the citizens? Yeah, if you don't know about that, Liza asks about the South Africa situation. The white farmers in South Africa have been persecuted terribly under the current ANC regime in South Africa, and many of them have been murdered. They basically are just given criminals free rein in South Africa to attack and murder and rob uh, any whites in South Africa. And so South Africans have been leaving the country in droves for many years. President Trump now mentioned, or I think actually Marco Rubio mentioned, that we would give temporary protected status to white South Africans who are being persecuted by their governments if they want to come to the United States. And I think that's a good thing. That's what temporary protected status is supposed to be for. I think a better thing would be to put a lot more pressure on the ANC government to stop calling for the murder of, part of their population, about 20% of their population. And so there you go. Can you take a boat to Iwo? No, you cannot. You can only take a plane. Palestinian protesters, real or scam? We don't know. Don't know. All right. So I'm gonna end it there. There's a lot more we could talk about, but I did put a link up to the DNI threat global threat report over at chuckholton.com. You can go read the entire thing there if you like. I'm going to put up a summary because it's a very long report. So I'm going to write a bullet point summary of what the report says. If you don't want to read the whole thing, you can go to chuckholton.com and get that summary. And you're going to want to go over there and become a supporter. Make sure you, again, hit the like and subscribe button as well. And let's say a prayer and we'll be done. Lord God, we come to you right now and just pray for Frank, that World War II veteran I interviewed yesterday. And I just ask that you would keep him healthy, allow him to go back and see Iwo Jima again. Pray that it would be cathartic for him and healing for everybody that goes. Lord, I thank you for this tour. And I just pray that you would work it out so that the people that need to be there will be able to go. And thank you for how you've just opened the doors for us to get all the interviews that we need over here. I pray for all the people who are watching, Lord. I know that the thousands of people who are watching us right now, that everybody's got a battle that they're fighting that nobody else knows anything about. And so you know, Father, and I pray that you would just make yourself very plain to each one of our viewers today in that issue that they've got, and that you would just miraculously help them to work through that issue and to have peace about those issues. And we pray all these things in the name of your powerful name, in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay. Hey, thank you, PC. Appreciate that. Thanks everybody for watching. Uh, yeah, everybody loves my t-shirts. This is Black Rifle Coffee t-shirts. I'm trying to get them as a sponsor. So that's why I keep wearing their t-shirts, because they need to sponsor the Hot Zone. And if you, maybe I'll put an email address up for uh, their sponsorship people, and tell all you guys to send them an email and sponsor them. Oh, hey, there's a green, hold on, I'm gonna show you this. There's a little green lizard running along there. And one more view for you. It was a gorgeous, gorgeous morning here in Guam. So there you go. War is hell, but somebody's got to serve in Guam.